correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, the podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. We're back again, myself and my buddy Steve.
Hey, what's up, Steve?
And by the way, nice job making it here with no internet. I really appreciate that.
I magically waved a wand and pulled some strings and got that fixed.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad, because no one wanted to listen to me talk to myself for an hour.
Well, we have a guest.
Oh, well, yes, that's true.
But before that, we have a brand new podcast to the network.
Yes, we do. A new podcast to the D20 Radio Network would be Table Flip, which it's Tyler, formerly from the what the heck was the name of his podcast?
Uh-oh.
It was the one with the cool New England post-apocalyptic Genesys actual play and Tabletop Tales.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. In any case, we had him on a while back, but it's him and Fat Crab, who you may have seen some of his work on the Genesys Foundry on Drive Through RPG.
You might also find him on our Discord regularly.
Yes. But they're talking about all the different settings for Genesys, be it official ones published on the Foundry, etc., and so on. And if you're looking for them, I believe it's anchor.fm/tableflip or something like that. I will put a link in the show notes so everyone can find it.
Yeah.
But they're cool people, and Genesys is a cool game. And that leads us into our guest for this week.
Yes.
So we have, because it's October and spooky month and all those things, we got a hold of the co-author of the Genesys supplement, Hell is Full. So welcome to Me and Steve. Scarpy.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to join us. So, you and Mr. Scott Zumwalt collaborated on this, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, correct. Yep. We both were working on two different projects at the same time. And through some chatting, we decided, hey, let's try and meld these both together and see what comes up. And that's kind of how we got to this.
Very cool. Well, I was going to say, just on a skim, it seems like very much a Walking Dead-ish setting supplement for Genesys. But amongst one of the other things that I've heard, be it through, you did an interview with The Forge a little while ago, well, probably close to a year ago now, and so on. It also appears to be, in addition to being a setting in its own, kind of has some guidelines to kind of how to turn up the grit level in Genesys, which I think is also something that bears exploring.
Yeah. So Genesys Rules as Written has always, or hasn't really, with death, our character death isn't really a thing that happens in Genesys. And we wanted to potentially explore that idea. So Scott was working on a kind of a battle royale kind of thing, drop the PCs down on an island and they have to fight and survive their way to some shelter or escape in a helicopter or what have you. And I was working on The Last of Us, the PlayStation video game. I was making a supplement that could work in that setting. And both of those things kind of they kind of have a requirement for upping the lethality. And so through some of his additional rules that he was coming up with and through some of my talent ideas, we kind of melded them together and then slapped on the paint job of zombies. And that's kind of where we ended up.
Okay. Yeah, because I have to admit, I'm not the biggest. I have never actually watched an episode of The Walking Dead. I know many people think it's an amazing show, and it falls much into the category for me currently that the whole vampire craze did in the late 90s, where it's like, well, if everyone thinks it's that cool, then I'll go find something else to find that I think is cool. And like I said, I don't say that to diminish it in any way. It's just not my thing. But from everything I understand, this is a really cool supplement especially in the context, and I think this is the beautiful thing about Genesys, is that it's take it apart and use the pieces your own way if you need to.
Yep. That's a really big thing that I love as well about Genesys is you can take something from that somebody made over here and give it a new paint job, or you can tweak it and pull this out and add this in and whatever. And for the most part, it's kind of a just a plug and play for the most part, where you can take what you like from here and put it in over here, and then it's good to go. And the additional rules that we came up with for Hell is Full can be put into really anything. It doesn't have to be zombies. It could be a Cthulhu setting or some other non-IP related horror or survival, just the up the stakes a little bit and create some tension.
Yeah, I see you also have some kind of scavenging, scrapping rules, which I think the only other thing I've seen those in was the salvage setting. But I like the fact that yours are kind of a little more mundane, if you will.
Yeah, we didn't we wanted to do something with scavenging and salvaging that's kind of left over from my Last of Us ideas, but we didn't want to make it so much of a we didn't want to make it a very we didn't want to put it in the forefront. We didn't want it to be the main thing. We just wanted it to kind of, in typical Genesys sense, just kind of push it off to the side, and we can roll with the punches. And what Scott was able to do with some of my ideas, and then take it into, with his expertise of the system, make it so that we only track, I believe it's 3 separate types of junk or scrap or whatever, and then you can use those to create your own weapons or armor or what have you. But it cuts down on some of the bookkeeping that you might run into with other ways of doing a similar thing, and allows you to, again, on the fly, reskin things if you wanted to.
Yeah, well, like we were having a discussion in a group chat we have going around a Star Wars game that we're about to start up. And I bring it up because narrative dice system, technically, yes, Star Wars and Genesys are slightly different, but the foundation of the game is very much the same. And I said, was telling, because I've got 2 players that have never touched a narrative dice before. And I told them that I said, I feel like this is a system that very much wants to be played to the spirit of the system as opposed to the letters of the system.
Sure. Yep.
and like that's how I tend to play games anyway, but it's freeing. But one thing that I think Steve and I have noticed this in some of the Genesys we've gotten to play is that Genesys also breaks down if you aren't careful in defining your setting. Like if you're too loosey-goosey when you set up the game at your table, and we could use this and that. You do still need to constrain it so that everyone is imagining kind of in the same direction.
Sure.
And I don't know where I was going with that other than, this again, just skimming through it because I didn't manage to get my hands on it till today, but it does feel very focused. Like you said about the survival aspects and to a certain point, yes, the zombies are front and center, but they're not in another way. You know what I mean? Like,
sure. Yep.
I think you could take this and very much go Mad Max with it very, very easily.
Yeah, and that was definitely a thing that we wanted to do, where many of the talents, the talents specifically, I believe there's only one. I think there's only one talent that is very specific to zombies or the infected quality that we came up with.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, all the other talents are you could put them in really any setting to, like I said before, up the lethality or make it a little bit more gruesome.
Mm-hmm.
To pick and choose if you wanted to.
So I guess, do you want to get into a little bit then, before we meander on down some other road? What exactly did you guys do to turn up the lethality? Because that's something that I think both Steve and I have interest in for other angles of Genesys.
Right. So some of the optional rules that were included, things like ammo counting. So instead of counting individual rounds or individual how many shots you made or how many bullets you have left over in your bandolier or in your backpack or what have you, we came up with rules that, I don't want to use the term hand wave, but definitely broadly use a narrative brushstroke to create scarcity to create scarcity where scarcity may not have been. So the out of ammo rules, where you're going to want to bring extra ammo or find some. There's a new headshot rules that increase lethality of headshots. The kind of to sneak up on somebody and do extra damage. I think Realms of Terranoth came out with a talent that was kind of like a you don't know I'm here, so I'm going to do more damage to you kind of thing.
With a sneak attack rule, so to speak.
Yes. We kind of took that and went a different direction with it for unaware targets. And then when we get into the talents, many of them interacted with or altered certain things like crit values in weapons, or gave you benefits for stacking skill ranks. So for example, there's one called Sting Like a Bee. Obviously, it's a reference to a famous boxer. And it gives you a benefit for your brawl checks. But then if you have 3 ranks or more, or sorry, start over. Been a while since I looked at this. Gives you benefits for brawl checks, and depending on which weapon you're using, if it already has, in this case, stun, it instead increases that stun rating. So if you're good at brawl checks, this makes it even better just by taking this talent. Or there's if you're a gunslinger, if you have a certain amount of ranks, you can take this talent and makes all of your any weapon, no matter what it is, better. But some weapons are betterer.
I especially like the one tier 4, the until the handle breaks off, which just kind of, it fully, it's that just frustrated rage, just beating on something until the only thing left is part of the handle.
Yep. That one, in conjunction with Gruesome Shot, created some very fun interactions in our playtest that we did, which you can actually find on YouTube.
Ooh, I'll have to go looking for that, or you'll have to send me a link. I can link it in the show notes or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, it's been a while since we did an episode, largely based on Genesys, and I figured it was thematic, and plus, I don't know, you're just a cool person to talk to. So, but I don't know, Steve, do you have any more direct questions on this?
Not direct questions just yet.
Okay, because I think kind of more what not to say more, but one of the things I really kind of wanted to pick your brain on was using this and whatever else using it to turn up the grit in Genesys, because Steve and I have made no secret of the fact, we're both massive cyberpunk genre fans. I know from having listened to you various other places, interacted with you on Discords and so forth, you're a massive Shadow of the Beanstalk fan.
Yep.
And let's just say, and I'll speak only for myself at the moment, that I have complicated feelings around Shadow of the Beanstalk, as for me, cyberpunk is very fast and dirty and gritty and deadly and everything like that. I was introduced to the genre by Cyberpunk 2020, which is a notoriously deadly game. I mean, the creator's kind of tagline for himself personally is, "I'm the guy who killed your cyberpunk character." That being said, that's not the only take on it. And Shadow of the Beanstalk, to me, is a really, really neat world and setting. But for my taste, it doesn't have as much of the punk in it and that grit and the dirtiness. But when you and I were having a Discord conversation kind of slightly about this before we went down too deep of a road, you said you almost view it as kind of post-cyberpunk, which actually tracks. And because I think it's I would call it almost a sci-fi setting. Just, I get hung up on the term cyberpunk, and I think Steve and I have similar feelings in that regard.
Right. Yeah. No, there's been plenty of times where I have talked about cyberpunk, the genre, and when I am talking about it, I have to reference it as cyberpunk little c, or cyberpunk, the genre, because if anyone has tried Googling something for cyberpunk, the genre, you're not going to find it because it's just going to be overwhelmed with cyberpunk capital C.
Mhm.
And it's tough to find those other sci-fi punk settings or ideas or imagery.
Right.
And I think I did mention before I was a huge fan of Android Netrunner for the
Mhm.
last 10 years at least. And when when Genesys was announced, they were using images from Android Netrunner, and I just assumed, hey, if there's a chance that I can play in Android, I got to get this. So that's basically how I got the system, was banking on the idea that I'd be able to play in Android. And so that setting, I'm already in love with the setting. And then these rules came along and I'm like, all right, sure, I'll take this. And so I know that Cyberpunk, I've played the video game. I never played the old tabletop game. I played the video game and I've looked into plenty of videos on the new Cyberpunk Red that we're on now. Is that what it is? Am I
Mhm.
okay?
That's the newest version, yeah.
I've looked into that. I've watched some videos on like character creation and what it's all about, and and watching the new Netflix series, and I've realized that I don't think it's for me, which is fine. That's why we play games, right? I mean, there's plenty of ice cream out there for everyone, and Shadow the Beanstalk just happens to scratch that itch for me. But to kind of loop this all the way back around again, you could take these talents or these rules, this supplement, and strip off the zombies and put them into Shadow the Beanstalk, and you've got a much grittier, much more deadly and bloody experience.
Well, right, and that was kind of like I said, because and for some reason I can't find my copy of Red right now, but I mean, it's around here somewhere. I just don't know where the heck I said it. But yeah, like I think to me that's kind of what I really wanted to drill in on was, how to take these things, like you said, be it the ammo rule where because Genesis, by the nature of what it's designed to do, is pretty hand wavy about ammo rules. But in a gritty setting, the idea that you have to watch how much ammo you're using is an easy way to do that. And I kind of like what you guys have done, where you're basically saying, we took the old ammo rules and now they only last for this scene. You have to have more ammo for the next scene.
Yeah. Without giving away too much, we basically wanted to have a way so that you don't. Well, this is going to sound weird. You don't rely on threat happening for ammo to disappear. We just said, hey, it disappears. You used it, and that's one thing about Genesys that's different from other RPGs is that a turn in Genesys might be 2 seconds. It might be 2 minutes. It doesn't matter. It's kind of hand wavy. It's narrative, right? So when you take those shots, you might be shooting, reloading, shooting, all in the same turn. And then the next turn, maybe you just take 1 or 2 shots because, the camera is only on you for a couple of seconds.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I know even still sometimes struggle with the narrative system, the narrative dice system is that idea that because I've been playing role playing games on and off since the mid '90s, and it's always you take your turn and I shoot at that guy, so bang. Well, the way the narrative dice system does it, I shoot at that guy, but I may be shooting 7, 8 times and only hitting him once, and I hit the thing behind him and it goes off, and so I spend advantage because I didn't actually hit him, but I hit the thing behind him and whatever. And I think that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with is kind of wrapping your head around the discrete nature of so much of it. And yet once you grasp that that's how it works, it unlocks so much more.
I know one of the experiences that I've run into is the players that are new to the system, they'll roll a pool of dice, whether it's for an attack or for some sort of check or whatever. And then they'll grab onto the cheat sheet that I had on the table that says how to spend advantage and threat or whatever. And at first, when I was first trying to get them to learn, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, look, this is ideas from the core rulebook. This is what you could do. This is whatever. And now I'm realizing that I'm shifting into no, put those away. You tell me like what do you think would be cool to happen? I'll say, yeah, I mean that's you rolled 5 advantage, cool. You could spend all of them and do this crazy, awesome, spectacular thing.
Yeah, but it is, and maybe you could answer this because I've not yet got to experience this, but I almost feel like Genesis might actually be easier for people who have never role played before to pick up.
I don't know if it would be easier for people who have never role played, but definitely who haven't used a vastly popular system. I know that a lot of my friends use another system, and coming to this, I've tried to list off some bullet points, like, hey, here's some selling points that this is why it's different than X. This is why it's different than Y. And for the most part, my experience so far has been excitement from those people that I explained to them, like, oh yeah, that is really cool. That's a neat idea. And so it brings new people to the table with definitely looking for a different experience than what they've had before. And the narrative dice system, I believe, does that tenfold because of the non-binary nature of it, where you can fail forward or you can succeed catastrophically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's, I think, and look, let's be honest. I mean, D&D is the elephant in the room. Pretty much anyone who's probably listening to this podcast has probably played it before. I have, Steve has, I assume you have.
Yep.
I got a handful of books down here in the drawer. It is what it is. But I think it has caused many of us to have habits and tendencies and approaches to gaming that Genesis and a lot of other games as well kind of ask you to set by the wayside. And sometimes that can be tough for people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know there's been plenty of times where somebody comes to the Genesis Discord and asks a question, and I wouldn't say the root of their question is this, but a lot of helping them understand the answer comes with saying, all right, take what you've learned from this system and just forget about it for now, and just look at this with an open mind, because like you said before, where it's my turn, I roll a die, I shoot the guy once, or I take one shot, or I let loose an arrow once. And like you said, that's not how it is with the narrative dice system. Things can happen. It's kind of wishy-washy in time, and that can be tough sometimes for people who are used to something that's a little bit more structured.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, like I said, that's where, like I said, to the point I made earlier, where I think, especially maybe with newer players, you do need to be, as the GM, you need to define your setting perhaps more than on the surface you think you need to, because you want the players thinking in the right headspace about the tone, etc. Because I know Steve and I were involved in a game that, based on what was communicated to us by the GM, we all had kind of an image of what we thought we were playing. And then we started playing, and it was like, oh, well, okay, I get what we're doing, but if this is what we were doing, why did we say we were doing this other thing? And for me, at least, that also went to, well, then why are we, and don't get me wrong, I love Genesis, but if this is what we're doing, why aren't we doing this other system that is exactly what you're trying to emulate?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, how do I want to say this? Like I said, I love Genesis. I think it's an amazing game. Almost a year ago, we got to have Jay Little on the show. And just through the course of conversation, Call of Cthulhu came up somehow. And Jay said, look, I think Genesis could do Call of Cthulhu, but I don't know if it could do it as well as Call of Cthulhu does Call of Cthulhu. And I think, as much as, and I'm sure, I'm not terribly active on the Genesis Discord, I am a member. I think Genesis adapts to a multitude of settings much better than, say, 5th edition D&D. But I think sometimes, too, it's just less work if you go get the purpose-built thing for what you're doing.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. If something's made for the thing you're doing, you're probably, or you might be better off using the thing that you want to do that thing with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Genesis, being somewhat of a toolkit, it can be stretched. It can be. I've said it well, 3 times now. It can be repainted. It can be, cherry picked for rules for this, that, the other, and it doesn't really break the system.
Right.
With when you have an understanding of the core purpose of the system. Anyway, if you read through the combat rules for the first time and then say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to change this, I'm going to take this in from over here, maybe that's not the best way of doing it, but if you're having fun, you won. You did it.
Mm-hmm. That's, and I think that's something that also gets lost sometimes by, how do I want to say it? Those of us who spend perhaps a slightly unhealthy amount of time obsessing over role-playing games is that we get so fixated on the way that you're supposed to do it that we lose a little bit of track of, but if you're not doing it that way and you still have a good time, the whole table has a good time, then you won.
Well, and I think that's, there's the old term, you lose the forest through the trees, right? You start to focus on the little things and you forget the bigger picture that is, we're here to have a good time. And I think Genesys facilitates having a fantastic time. I really
Agreed.
love this system. I'm definitely excited to play with the rule set and some of the new ideas that you've put out there in the book that you and Zumwalt put together. I've read over it a little bit like Steve, and the first thing I skipped to was to look for your combat stuff, because I think that's one of the things that Genesys does not do well.
Sure, I can see that.
I think Genesys combat is slow and plotting at times, and I'm sure I'll have a lot of people come after me and be like, no, Genesys combat's great. And I'm not saying the system's not good. I'm saying that this one particular thing it does isn't great. And yeah, I really like the product that you guys put out with Hell is Full. I think it's a really cool product. I think that's something that definitely gravitated me towards it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I understand I don't know. I don't know where I was going with this thought. I lost my entire train of thought.
I think some of what you're saying, though, about the combat is because I find myself in the same place, but every time I sit back and look at the situation afterwards, I find myself having fallen into that, thinking about combat like it's traditional turn-based RPG combat, not the swirling narrative that is Genesys. And so, yes, in a sense, it's slower, but we're all stuck in that mindset so often of a round is 6 seconds or 3 seconds or 15 seconds or, insert whatever from whatever system.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
there's some of that, but I still think there's other things that Genesys just doesn't do great as far as combat. And I don't really want to get into the real nitty-gritty details of it.
Fair.
Because as much as I love sitting and talking about rules, I don't think our audience is much interested in us having a 45-minute rule argument.
Well, but I think it goes to the design of the system.
Yes.
The whole system was designed to emulate those, for lack of a better word, fantasy action movie.
Right.
It was not designed to emulate miniatures war game combat.
No, and that's not necessarily even what my issue with it. I again, it's not even necessarily what my issue with it is. It's more along the lines of, in standard Genesys, and this is why I really like Hell is Full. In standard Genesys, combat almost has no weight. You can get injured, you can get knocked out, but in most cases, you're not going to get knocked dead. And I feel Hell is Full brings that nice weight that the threat of loss of character not necessarily has to be there in every combat, but should be there in an important combat. And I feel that that's what it does really well.
I think the rules as written for character death, I believe, it's been a while since I looked them up, but I believe it's basically falling from a ridiculously high height, or the GM says so. And that's basically it. Like if you fall below, take more wounds than your wound threshold, you just pass out.
Right.
And if the GM says, okay, you pass out and fall down and the guy stabs you in the throat, he could say that, sure. I would hope that they had some sort of conversation with the player saying, hey, this is a possibility, rather than just doing it. But right as Genesys is written, that's the only thing that's available. Forgot what my point was. I lost it.
It's going around tonight.
Well, I think isn't it and I'm only going by memory because I haven't read it in a while, but isn't it for every point of damage you take below, like once you've exceeded your wound threshold, that counts as a crit, and the stacking rules apply. So you're very quickly going to get to that, what is it, the 150 insta kill crit?
Yeah, 151 plus.
Yeah. So,
Um,
but
I think that's true, but it's for every instance of damage after you pass
okay.
out, I think. So if the
Okay.
GM just continuously shoots you in the chest while you're on the ground, obviously you're going to keep gaining wounds and then continuously rolling crits. But
yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and that, yeah, the stakes don't feel as high a lot of times in Genesis combat, but this has a lot of tools to do that, and so I think you and I are going to find a lot of uses for a lot of this.
Oh yeah, I've already, like I said, I've already started to really dig into the book. Not just, life gets in the way of things, but not as much as I'd like to. But I've really started to dig into the book and look into some of this stuff. And honestly, I'm debating even running a zombie game, and that's not even my genre of things that I like to play.
but it could be rethemed to, I mean, instead of
Oh yeah,
infected with a zombie virus, it's like I said, it started as The Last of Us. So if you've played those games, it's
yes,
a
yep.
fungal infection that turns people into quote unquote zombie like creatures.
Well, I could see this being used. Well, a game that we tried to start playing with a completely different system and then realized that we wanted to use Genesis, but didn't have time to put the work into. A lot of these rules work great in, like, if you want to do like a Jurassic Park 3 scenario, not Jurassic World 3, but Jurassic Park 3.
Sure.
I watched Jurassic World Dominion the other day and I'm still confused.
Yes.
But anyway.
Well, what I'll say is, just as an aside, because it's horror month, I don't know. I could absolutely see my friends and my group of players playing a zombie game and it being maybe less Last of Us or Walking Dead, more Dead Alive. If you've ever heard of that movie, the Peter Jackson movie, 1993.
I don't believe I have.
It is a horror comedy, and it is amazing. If you can stomach gore, it definitely is worth a check out. But it is freaking hilarious.
I just looked it up on IMDb. I know the cover. I've seen that cover,
Yep.
but I don't know anything else beyond that.
Yeah, it's a zombie movie, curse style zombie movie, very early 90s, late 80s style. Peter Jackson, of all people, directed it, and it is hilarious. It is one of my favorite, like, of that genre. It's one of my favorite movies. That and Shaun of the Dead is a good one.
That's yeah.
My
household is a big fan of Shaun of the Dead, and I'm drawing a blank on the director right now. A friend of mine would be very upset.
Well, we won't tell him.
Edgar Wright.
Edgar Wright, thank you.
Yeah, all of the what do they call it? The Coronado trilogy, which is Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and then World's End, which the World's End is a weird movie.
Well, but you know what though? The more I'm thinking about this supplement is so rich because there's so much you can pull, like you said, to do a zombie-ish thing. But if you wanted to do the day after tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
or like put this together with Mechasis and do a like a Pacific Rim the Black, the animated thing that Netflix did, that was a spin-off of the Pacific Rim series.
Yeah, that could be interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
there's a lot. Like, I really feel that, and this just goes out to the listeners. I really feel that if you are a fan of Genesis and you haven't picked up Hell is Full, you really need to, because it adds a layer to Genesis that just wasn't there before, and is actually a fantastic thing to have in your toolkit in general, whether you're interested in horror or not. Because even like you said, with your ammo counting rules, that adds tension, and you could use that for a suspense game. You could use that, not necessarily for a horror game. You could import that into a post-apocalyptic game and use your ammo rule set.
A Western
or whatever. Any rule set you could easily transport that over to. So I I really think it's a great supplement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I like it, which is saying something, considering I liked it in the first place.
You guys can keep talking it up. Keep going. I love this.
That's why people like coming on our podcast, because we have people on where we like the product that they put out, so we like inflate their egos while they're here. Are there any final? We don't have any Patreon questions?
No, well, it sprawled into a discussion much like the one we've just had.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So one of the I'll shout this out. One of the tiers in our Patreon is that you get advance notice of when we have guests on. When you get that advance notice, you get to ask our guests questions, but none of our patrons have asked questions today. So I think with that, why don't you go ahead and plug everything and anything you would like to plug, Scarpy, and we'll move into the next segment of our podcast.
I guess for plugging purposes, I don't have much going on from myself right now, but I do know that since it's spooky month, Scott Zumwalt just put out a spooky bundle on DriveThruRPG that you can get. Forgive me, Scott, for not knowing this offhand. You can get Something Strange, his adventure for Something Strange. You can get his magic, Zenithrix's Guide to Magic. You can get the magic items toolbox. Hell is Full, expended fear rules.
Because I just bought that bundle today because drive-through is nice enough to knock down the price based on what you've already bought.
Yes, and I think drive-through is also doing a spooky month sale. So
Yes.
It's not only bundled, it's also on sale.
Yeah, I wish I knew off the top of my head. This will still air in October, so it
will still be
active. Well, you've done some other supplements as well, haven't you?
Yeah. Yep. So, like we mentioned previously, I'm a big fan of Shadow the Beanstalk. I took all the information, I believe it was 40 or 50 pages of the city of New Angeles and every district that it has and all the points of interest and blah, 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 and kind of narrowed it down and filtered it down into just a 13 or 14 page supplement. That's the New Angeles tour guide. Not only did I take all that information and distill it down, but I also added in rarity modifiers for items bought in that district. They might be more or less rare depending on the district. And then also costs of living for each district. So I made that. And then I also made the Guru's Guide to Cyber Things, which is a supplement that focuses on taking the hacking aspect of Shadow the Beanstalk rulebook and kind of extrapolating it and using Android Netrunner, the card game, as a lot of influence.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, I think unless you'd like to plug any of your social or anything for people to follow you at.
I don't have much of a social presence, honestly.
That's fine.
I'm a mod on Discord. You can find me there.
Okay, fair enough. I think with that, we're going to go ahead and move into Game of the Week.
Woohoo! Game of the Week!
Game of the Week! Game of the Week!
I'll actually go first this week because I found something that's been sort of fitting my theme as of recently.
All right.
I have a game that was literally released today, and today is October 17th of 2022, called Gastronomy, and it's Gastronomy, Gastronomy.
Okay.
This is a game where you've been hired to help ghosts to the afterlife, and by doing that, you are a team of chefs, and you are trying to obtain and cook a wayward spirit's remaining traces, meaning that you're trying to get them put back together so that they can find their way to the afterlife. And proper planning, teamwork, and a little bit of luck, you might just get the souls back together before it fades away forever. It's $7.99 on DriveThruRPG. It is PDF only. It looks really cute because it's got this little like ghost cupcake as its cover. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking that is one of the most interesting, unique takes on a tabletop RPG I think I've seen in a long time. And I could see that leading to a lot of fun, a lot of wholesome fun, and a lot of, you even have deep discussions with that because you could get into some interesting topics. But
I'm picturing Cupcake Wars set in a morgue.
yeah, well, I'm picturing Ratatouille, but everybody's dead. But yeah, that's gastronomy,
Yeah.
which is a fantastic name.
Yes, it is.
And so whoever would like to go next can go next.
Why don't you go ahead, Kyle?
Alrighty. So along with the spooky theme, sort of, I guess, some friends of ours came over this past Friday and brought with them one of their subscription box games from Hunt a Killer. This is kind of a murder mystery in a box. The subscription, I guess I can't tell you how much the subscriptions are. The last I looked into it, it wasn't on sale or anything, and they were kind of expensive. But our friend had bought into it, and she brought over 2 episodes, so we were able to play them back to back. And it was probably a 3 or 4 hour endeavor to play through it and read through all the clues. The production quality on it is amazing. They send you a box, you open it up and it presents itself as if you were a detective, and it gives you all of the evidence that you would need, like police reports or pictures from security cameras, or even something small like it's set in this city. So here's a tourist pamphlet that tells you information about different locations. And essentially, you just dump out everything onto the table. Everyone reads everything, and you try and solve whether it was a murder or where it happened, who did it, kind of this, that, the other. Yeah, it was a fun little experience. If you share the cost, or if you wanted to just buy it for a little date night at home or whatever, I think it's a great idea.
So, what was this called again?
It is Hunt a Killer.
Okay.
Their website has a lot of different options to get. There's Mystery at the Magnolia Gardens, or there's Death Below Deck, or Body on the Boardwalk. I know Target has one of the has Death at a Dive Bar, which is what my wife and I played before our friends came over. We played that one a couple months back, and that one is obviously there's a death at a dive bar, and you have to try and solve who done it and why. And yeah, production quality, like I said, is really good for the price. And this new, you can get that one from Target, where it's just a box. It's just the whole thing is in one box. And then the subscription models are kind of like episodic, so you can do this episode, and then I want to say there's 3 or 6 episode bundles. But yeah, 2 thumbs up on those.
Cool. It sounds like almost like a procedural in a box then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kind of.
yep.
Yep. I'm glad to hear somebody's actually played that in person. I've heard it advertised on other podcasts, and I've always been kind of curious about it. I was like, I don't want to invest into this thing to find out it's kind of disappointing. And I'm glad to hear that you're pleasantly surprised or pleased with that.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I would suggest is that if you were going to get something like this for like a double date, like 4 people or more, it might not be enough to sink your teeth into for having multiple people. But if there's only 2, or if you're doing it by yourself, I think there's a lot of information there where you can't spread out the responsibility of reading everything, and then people kind of talk about all the ideas.
Right.
But if you have if it's a solo experience, or if it's you and a significant other, or just you and a friend or whatever, I think it's a really good time.
That's the problem with a lot of mystery things, is too many people can make a mystery thing just sort of fizzle out.
Now, just because I'm curious, are they like replayable reasonably, or are they kind of one and dones?
These are I would say they're one and dones.
Mhm.
Some things so far, some things are destroyed, and by some things I mean an envelope. So for the most part, I think it would be fine to regift, or just hand off to a friend, or like, hey, we played this, so now you go. So you could reuse it that way, but I don't know how much fun you would have, unless, I mean, I have quite a few unlock games, or I'm drawing a blank on the other the other card game in a box, the other Escape Room in a Box. There's Escape Room in a Box is a brand, but I have Unlock games, and those are just a deck of cards, and you just flip the first one, and it's like, all right, you see these things, and you play through this thing, and we've milked those things through multiple groups. Even though I know how to solve the things, I'm just there to flip cards and help people along, but I'm not going to give anybody answers. And that in and of itself is still an enjoyable experience.
Mm-hmm. I was just curious.
Before we move on, I want to ask you real quick, since you sort of seem like a fan of board games and procedural board games, have you played Time Stories?
I have not, unfortunately.
You got to get your hands on Time Stories.
When Time Stories came out, I was very, very interested in it. I'm a huge fan of board games. I'm a huge fan of time travel.
Mm-hmm.
Like in movies. I mean, obviously, I don't do time travel that you know.
That's what you told me tomorrow.
Yes, yeah. So I wanted to play it, and I wanted to make some sort of group that would chip in on each episode, because the expansions that have come out are different sections of time. So you have this one that's a Victorian. I think there's maybe a dinosaur one.
There is.
I could be completely. I could be wrong.
There's 4 or 5 of those. I don't know.
And from what I've heard, a lot of people say that it's a neat experience, but it's not a great board game. If that's what you're into, I guess. I mean, I love just board games for the experience and to have people over and at the table. But if you're looking for meaningful mechanics and interesting interactions with the things on the board, you might not enjoy it that much. But I really wanted to get into it, and every time that there's a board game sale online, I check for Time Stories, and then I look and I'm like, oh, it's like half off or less. It will never get played. And then a couple of years back, the pandemic hit, so I haven't played next to anything over the last 2 years or so.
Fair. That's rough. I had the lucky experience of playing Time Stories when it came out, and I was very, very happy with that game. And I know, just hearing you talk about Hunter Killer, I was like, that would probably sound like it would probably be up your alley. But yeah, I recommend, if you can, at least pick up the base game. A lot of people say, and I can see why they say that, you're probably only going to want to play it once. And I say play in sort of the loosest terms. It's a very narrative experience. And that's sort of what I was also thinking of when you were talking about Hunt a Killer. I was like, that sounds like a narrative experience. So, but all right, Steve, what do you got?
All right. So I have also gone somewhat thematic, both in general topic and in the toolkit.
What'd you do? Pick Hell is Full?
No.
Yeah, Hell is Full. I've heard that's really good.
Yeah, so have I, actually.
Yeah.
No, my pick this week is actually not a game at all, but a universal supplement. It is the Dread Thingonomicon.
Oh.
And what this is apparently there was this series for a while called 20 Things. I don't know if it was done via Patreon or a blog or what, but this is essentially all of that compiled into one 476-page volume. And it's as if your campaign features Abnormal Lesser Undead, Alchemist Laboratories, Ancient Necropolises, Archives and Libraries, Bandits and Brigands, and goes down through a whole paragraph of assorted things, dark and spooky and whatever. I think it's essentially a giant book of like tables and prompts.
Sounds like my kind of book.
I love tables.
The PDF is $28. They have print on demand options. Looking at the preview, hang on, let me get in the right window. There we go. There's stuff like like there's 8 pages of abnormal low-level undead. There's a section on castles, alchemist laboratories, marketplaces, dark caverns, dragon lairs, crypts and catacombs, fairs, fort on the borderlands, just all kinds of prompts and table-y thingies. Like I said, based on the 20 things list, I'm guessing they're, D20 random tables, but that's just me guessing because the preview doesn't go in that far. But it's a system neutral, largely aimed towards fantasy, but let's be honest, you can twist and bend that as need be.
Yeah, I think even urban chases, urban events, urban landmarks, urban oddities was in the description, so it seems somewhat universal anyway.
Yeah, well, like you said, a little bit of paint, it's something else anyway. Merchant caravan. So they're not horse-drawn carts, they're
Cart-drawn horses.
deuce and a halves.
I'm not sure that's the right set of paint.
But yeah, again, it's ideas. And sometimes, you get stuck in that, I need something cool. Well, if you read over a list of things and you go, well, if I combine these two, that's really cool. So like I said, for PDF's $28 right now. It's from a company called Raging Swan Press.
Mm-hmm.
But look, it's almost 500 pages of ideas.
Yeah. At the very worst, you could use that when you're having that writer's block.
Look, and let's be honest, the Dread Thingonomicon is just a cool title.
Oh no, I'd love to have the Dread Thingonomicon on my shelf. I don't often order things print on demand, and it's not terrible price, but I might order that print on demand.
Well, no, the print on demand, the hardcover,
$50.
Yeah. Now they did say it goes into is very explicit about this in the listing. It is only done in black and white, even though they offer it as a quote unquote color print, but that's because of the paper quality.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. That's okay.
Well,
the
yeah,
artwork's
I'm just
solid enough that it doesn't matter.
Like there's a big bold header at the bottom, a note about print options.
Yeah. Yeah, the artwork is very old school, and based on the company, it looks like they do a lot of OSR stuff. So
yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, I thought so.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking with us today of all things. All things pretty much. As always, links to everything are in the show notes. You can find us anywhere podcasts are found. Patreon, Discord, Facebook, Twitter, it's all there. Want to thank everyone for listening and remind you to be kind to one another. Get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.